Ayan na kung saan mga kayo dyan, mga ka-Meta. Welcome back dito sa latest episode natin ng Meta Live. Medyo napapadalas or actually the opposite yung ating mga nightly meta ngayon dahil ang dami natin mga daytime back to back mga engagements. I hope na appreciate niyo natin yung snippet na nakita niyo from our all-star, no? Triple star Admiral Ong, Justice Scorpio, Secretary Llamas, yan talaga pinagsama-sama natin mga the best, the greatest, no, doon sa kanilang um, respective fields na lang. Sabihin natin kay Sir Ronald, medyo may question mark. Kaya sabihin natin political o operations expert, leading expert. But kay Justice Scorpio, thank you very much. Shoutout kay Justice Scorpio for reassuring us na hindi malibel si Sir Ronald for calling some candidates openly as pro-China. Freedom of expression naman dyan. And of course, thank you so much for Admiral Ong for talagang tumutulong sa atin to keep the air of responsibility and discipline in the air, diba? Kumbaga, tuloy-tuloy lang ang discussion natin. So I hope you appreciate yung glimpses or not so glamorous ang tawag dyan, production level glimpses, but they'll be out soon, tomorrow hopefully, and then tonight actually we already got out yung ating interview naman with Professor Ranjit Rai and Professor Cleve Arguelles from Octa and Double R Numero, yung kanilang analysis ng mga latest trends sa elections. And speaking of the latest trend in elections, there's the good and the bad and the not so beautiful aspect of this. Pag-usapan natin yan. So actually sobrang dikit ang labanan. I'm looking at kakasend lang sa atin ng ibang kaibigan natin kasi ito. So I have sources na nag-forward sa atin ng corporate internal surveys. Meron tayong mga people from different campaigns so forwarded us surveys naman na hindi pinapublish pero for internal consumption talaga, including what even yung mga survey people tell me na among them yung pinaka nirespeto nila, 'di ba? Parang kumbaga the artist, 'di ba? At doon rin medyo grabe din, sobrang dikit ang laban. It's really hard to say sino talaga makapasok sa Magic 12, especially when you look at basically from number 9 upwards. Lalong dumikit pa yung numbers base dun sa mga nakita natin latest. And then of course, meron din tayong big data analytics version, yung third eye naman dun sa mga kaibigan natin dyan sa San Francisco. I initially serve as kind of consultant to them but no longer with them. So wala akong stake dyan and I already expressed my caveat. Dun naman, base naman dun sa numbers nila, malaking chance ni Bam Aquino for instance na makapasok. In fact, they put Bam Aquino as high as number 10. Again, sorry, I know high as number 10 sounds crazy considering clean slate ang ang achievements ng mga kaibigan natin na iba kumpara kay former Senator Bam Aquino. But again, considering how difficult is the field dun sa mga genuine opposition candidates, so hard that even the genuine opposition candidates have to say something about hindi naman sila opposition talaga, right? I mean, this is a crazy race. Ito, clean slate, guys. Galing talaga, clean slate. Yan. Mamaya magkumpara tayo ng notes sa pagandaan ng clean slate. Diba? Yun yung mga classmate mo na napaka galing talaga. Pangalan pa lang nilagay, okay na, pwede na i-submit. Ito yung sinasabi natin na para sa bayan. Of course. Marami na naman na-trigger na naman dyan na sinabi natin, leading political podcast. Talaga mga tao hindi nasanay sa atin. Alam naman tayo, medyo sutil din tayo. But I always said I'm not really competing, internal or anything like that. We're just trying to be the best version of ourselves. But obviously, if you look at the Spotify rankings, yeah, basically no other political podcast has anything close to us in terms of rankings. But it's not about the rankings; it's about the substance, and our style is very different, right? Ang style po natin dito is, this is really a conversation among subject matter experts, specialists, etc. And unfortunately, wala kaming time dun sa mga kalokohan at saka yung mga ano yun, yung mga dum-dum boy. Anyway, mamaya na tayo dyan. Let's go back to this, guys. Let's try to break down the numbers. But before breaking down the numbers, let's really look at these crazy numbers that are coming out, which tell you gaano kalalim yung problema natin at bakit tayo nandito because, oh, just to tell you guys, ang lakas din ng momentum ni Philip Salvador. Philip Salvador is very much within the range right now. So, alam ko marami nagagalit sa akin, bakit binibigyan mo naman attention, baka mamaya gagayan mo naman yung sayaw niya, lalong papasok yan. Well, some would say, and I think Sir Ronald among others is quite optimistic na dahil hindi siya admin, he will not have the kind of, you know what I'm saying, like mga day of election machinery support. So, maybe after all, his chances for entering the Magic 12 is not as high. But for me, the fact that someone na sobrang clean slate ang kanyang achievements record is quite competitive, right? It's so competitive. That just tells you guys how, how profound is our challenge. To put it nicely, all right? Kaya nga, kumbaga kung si Robin Hood Padilla ang paborito natin sa nakaraan na elections, although in Robin Hood's case, because tumakbo siya on the admin side, of course, he had all sorts of advantage. But, I mean, guys, come on. Number one pa si Robin Hood dun sa race back in the day. But going back to this, guys, we really have to look at, isa ito sa mga ugat ng problema, guys, na matagal natin sinasabi, guys. Tayo po ay biktima ng disinformation. I mean, that whole brouhaha over the Human Development Index, etc. My goodness. Time and again, kung sino-sino mga walang hiyang mga trying hard pretentious vloggers o yung mga bayaran na umaatake sa atin at kung ano-anong kwentong ginagawa. But I maintain my position that disinformation is just a symptom of a more fundamental problem. And as far as the more fundamental problem is concerned, ito nga sabi ko hindi lang yung mga human rights catastrophe at yung mga EJ case po ang naging isang legacy ng mga Duterte. But isa pa to, guys. Imagine mo, guys. According to the Philippine Statistics Authority, 19 million. 19 million, guys. 19 million. Actually, that's even more than the number of votes that Digong got or Lenny got in previous elections. 19 million sa ating mga kabataan na junior, senior graduates last year ay medyo kina-question yung kanilang functional literacy. That's really, really troubling. Again, really, I mean, it tells you how horrible the situation is in terms of yung ating education crisis. Kanina rin naglabas ito, no, the Second Congressional Commission on Education, EDCOM, naglabas din ng etong numbers naman. Dito naman nakikita natin, guys, na tuloy-tuloy pa rin, unfortunately, malalim pa rin itong problema natin when it comes to education crisis. And in terms of yung agwat, no, or yung education divide. So again, for instance, among the provinces in the country, number one na naman yung Benguet province. Again, I'm not saying this as a point of pride, but this is something that has been consistently there for quite some time. And kaya nga minensyon ko Human Development Index ng Benguet province. And then unfortunately, if you look at yung mga provinces na medyo nagsistruggle, again, you can see meron talaga tayong, di ba? Meron talaga tayong major divide, di ba? Again, I hate to get into this north-south divide and all of these kinds of discussions, but this is it. I mean, just look at the 10 highest. Although in fairness, South Cotabato also does very well, which tells you also Mindanao is, for instance, home to many highly developed provinces and highly developed human index in certain areas. But at the same time, if you look at the bottom 10 in terms of functional literacy, you can also see the problem na hanggang ngayon meron talaga tayong itong agwat. And as I explained to guys, especially doon sa mga nagpapanggap na biglang expert na sa Human Development Index, kitang-kita sa Google Scholar na marami nag-Google, ano ba itong Human Development? Actually, one of the major indicators Human Development Index is actually literacy, right? So dito again, nakikita natin na even by 2024, base dito sa findings na yan, unfortunately, it looks like some of the divides that we have been seeing throughout the decades ay persistent pa rin, right? You can blame Imperial Manila, but I think you also have to blame the persona trapos, right? Who are not doing a good job. Mas busy sila magpersona non grata na kung sino-sino based on fake news kaysa gawin nila yung trabaho nila na mabuti, right? Which is to elevate yung functional literacy and take care of the welfare of their people. Now, of course, even more troublingly for me, at least in terms of parochialism, this is the first time, guys, ever, first time ever, guys, na nakita natin na not a single Filipino university has entered top 500, not in the world, but in Asia. And I'll tell you just how shocking this is. I remember nung time na pag-graduate na ako, at saka may graduate school na ako by this time. UP was still among top 200 or 300 schools in the world. And there were years na even Ateneo would make it to top 200 or 200 something. Now, of course, that was still a far cry from the time of yung mga professors namin who were talking about the time when UP was among top 100 universities on earth, basically, and closer to top 50 rather than bottom 50, even at some point, I think top 60 or something, based on some rankings back in the day. So already parang disappointing sa amin yung numbers na top 200, 300 lang ang UP Diliman, for instance, or the UP system as general, or Ateneo, barely 400, LaSalle, barely in top 500. And naalala ko may time na nakapasok sa top 500 yata yung UST, and it was something that at the same time, at least andun pa rin tayo, 3 or 4 universities in top 500. And then if you look at, for instance, in literature and social sciences, especially in English literature, for instance, UP had among top 20 schools on earth, for instance, universities on earth. So there was a time na sobrang proud kami na in spite of significant decline, at least we're still very much among the elite universities on earth. Now, guys, even yung Asia's top 500 rankings, wala tayo. Not even a single Filipino school is there. Which tells you like sobrang malalim itong problema natin. Now, again, just to be clear, pagdating sa ating education crisis, these are the numbers we're seeing after 6 years of Rodrigo Duterte, who appointed, was this Briones, the former DepEd secretary. But obviously, pagdating sa issue ng edukasyon, hindi lang ito yung ginagawa ng secretary. Of course, it's the whole of government approach. But let's not forget, nevertheless, you had 6 years of Duterte, and then the past 2 years, yes, you can say BBM, you can blame BBM for not putting not putting the most competent people in charge of the DepEd initially. And let's not forget, the person who was in charge of DepEd in the earlier years of BBM, and he should be blamed for that. Ba't niya binigay yung DepEd sa taong to? It's Sara Duterte, our current vice president, na mukhang tumataas pa yung kanyang approval rating habang wala siyang ginagawa. Habang lalong wala siyang ginagawa functionally para sa ating gobyerno. Last time I checked, last year she had an actual job, which was DepEd secretary, and obviously we can have a long conversation gaano ka competent or incompetent yung kanyang serbisyo bilang DepEd secretary, but surprisingly mas mataas ang kanyang approval rating this year na wala siyang basically ginagawa. Anyway, that's why minsan hindi ko siniseryoso yung mga surveys na parang ano ba to, joke time ba to. But again, you had 6 years of Duterte, you had 2 years of Sara Duterte in charge of DepEd, and we know the reason why also siguro BBM, hindi yan siguro, I mean, BBM didn't give DND to Sara, but eventually he was, forced basically to give her the most resource-rich department, because obviously, andun yung Duterte influence, Duterte power. So basically, the past 8 years or so, or some would say the past decade, was the Duterte decade. From 2015, when slowly and slowly Duterte built up his national support and his national presence, and first became a dark horse, and then by 2016 January, February, he was already very competitive, and then the rest is history, right? So if you look at it, guys, yes, we can say that we have had an educational system deterioration decade after decade after decade. So basically, you can easily say from 1960s onwards, pababa, nagsa-slide downwards ang Pilipinas pagdating sa rankings, university rankings, we can see that. But nag-accelerate talaga siya over the past decade. And, as much as, of course, nakakabahala na we don't even have a single university. I mean, like, we like our top 4 big 4 universities cannot now even compete with some tier 2 university in like some other Asian country. I mean, if you go to the top 500, and I gave it a look, right? I gave it a look the other day, because sometimes actually kami mga academics, faculty from different universities, we're asked to also contribute to surveys. So I saw universities there in the rankings, not top 50 or 100, that I barely heard about before. And now you're saying that Ateneo, UP, and LaSalle cannot even compete with these ones. I mean, I understand that you can always question these rankings because for me personally, the only ranking that really truly matters to me is Shanghai Yaotong ranking, which looks at, for instance, number of Nobel Prize winners, ISI or Scopus publications. Really looks at research and output, academic output, and quality of faculty, etc., and competitiveness of entrance examinations. So, but nevertheless, I mean, the fact that in the more mainstream THES or Times Higher Education and other kind of rankings, we're not even in top 500. That's pretty alarming. That's really really alarming. Sino ba in charge ng CHED ba? And no, I mean, and it's even more alarming because you can see that the root of the problem is basic education pa lang. Talagang hirap na tayo. I mean, this functional literacy numbers are just frightening, right? And we already had a warning on that front. We had a warning on that front, guys. The other year nung nakita natin sa PISA rankings, either last ang Pilipinas or second to the last. I think second to the last tayo the other year in math, if I'm not mistaken. Pero last tayo sa parang reading comprehension and all. So this is the international rankings ng mga high schools at mga basic education ng iba't ibang iba-ibang bansa. What's interesting is actually nakausap ko a couple of people on this, including one of the most interesting conversation I had was with Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, a very geeky, smart guy in fairness. And he was telling me na nag-study tour sila sa Vietnam. Because if you remember, we discussed this before, Vietnam was number 8 out of almost 80 countries that were surveyed for PISA a few years ago. Number 8. So top 10 ang Vietnam in the world in terms of math and science and basic comprehension skills ng kanilang basic education. And of course, I was always looking at the fact na generally socialist countries or countries with socialist system do pretty well in terms of overall literacy, and they have very solid high quality universities. We see this in China, we see this in post-Soviet states, even Russian universities, etc., and also now in the case of Vietnam, no. But top 8 was really high, and I was wondering what's going on, because I remember in South Korea I had conversation with some people on this, some experts on this, and they were always telling me that the thing in South Korea is that ang taas ng bayad sa kanilang mga public school teachers. Like, their public school teachers are among the best paid public servants in South Korea. So I always had this idea na, yeah, of course, right? It's about compensation, it's about prioritization, etc. But then again, pinag-usapan namin ng mga iba't ibang tao, apparently Vietnam's education budget is not that much bigger than ours. So mukhang, yes, of course, it always helps if you pay your teachers better because fundamentally underpaid and underappreciated, and talagang minsan, I mean, this is Labor Day, right? Talagang minsan makikita mo talaga na kawawa talaga yung ating mga public school teachers, even private school teachers for that matter. But the thing is, again, you have the case of Vietnam whereby they're not spending that much higher than us on a per capita basis, and yet sobrang mas maganda yung kanilang performance sa atin. I mean, it's not even close. So if you look at the World Bank functional literacy, no, dun sa from grade 7 to 10, like, our functional literacy problem is like more than 3 times worse than Vietnam, right? So if Vietnam is around 20-25%, we're like lampas on 90%, right? So I'm not just looking at the rankings in PISA rankings. I'm also looking at the overall functional literacy rankings based on the World Bank numbers. Nakakabahala talaga yung mga numbers na yan. Anong implication nito? The implication is very clear, guys, diba? We can go all the way back to 1960s and blame different administrations and different DepEd secretaries. I think Sir Ronald in one of our podcasts discussed, for instance, yung concern niya, riniraise niya, I think with Brother Armin, that he felt, for instance, that our education system did not address yung issue ng martial law, dictatorship, essentially civic education as much as it should. Yes, so we can talk about also K to 12, etc. But ang katotohanan kasi, guys, dito is lumala talaga ng sobra-sobra yung problema natin sa education system natin over the past decade. And this is basically the Duterte decade, right? I mean, just look at hanggang ngayon, even if hindi na presidente or nasa Malacanang mga Dutertes, the way they talk about things, the way they bully our president, practically everyone else, warning everyone na pag bumalik sila, yari lahat, yung mga ganun. You can see that, this is still a Duterte era in many ways. Our politics is still shaped by them. Even if they're not at the top of the pyramid like before, but they could end up still there. And that's why, we always have to have very realistic understanding what's going on. But basically, ang sinasabi natin dito, guys, is bago natin pag-usapan yung negatibo na epekto ng disinformation sa ating demokrasya, huwag natin kalimutan na our education system as a whole has completely failed to empower our folks to deal with the disinformation problem. Because wag natin kalimutan, it's not like Pilipinas lang may disinformation problem. It's not like Pilipinas lang may troll farm. Remember, if you're China, Russia, I don't know, some troll farm in, I don't know, Macedonia, whatever, you can target any country on earth, right? This is internet, right? So, yes, we can talk about the whole Oxford study on the troll farms of Digong in 2016, allegedly led by the former media executive. We can talk about, for instance, the Washington Post report and the BuzzFeed report about yung mga call centers natin na iba dyan daw na nag-double time, including doing white trolling, if not acting as troll farms, etc. Yes, pwede natin pag-usapan yan. But ang reality, guys, is that when it comes to the issue of disinformation, this is a global crisis. This is a global problem. The Finns and Scandinavians deal with disinformation also on a daily basis. Katabi lang nilang Russia, Estonia, Baltic states, so on and so forth. US, all of the discussion about Russian interference. Taiwan vis-a-vis China. We can talk about a lot of countries who have been at the receiving end of sharp power operations, malign influence operations, etc. Many countries are dealing with all sorts of different disinformation, troll farms, crazy stuff. There was even like some suggestion I saw in the Washington Post report na baka some of our call centers may have been involved in election, white propaganda, whatever you want to call it, in other countries, including during Brexit, for instance. I mean, it's crazy, right? But what I'm saying here is that unfortunately, hindi mawawala itong mga troll farms na yan. Kasi even if you get rid of troll farms here, there could be troll farms abroad that could still target us. Kaya nga, iba na naman layer yan. Cybersecurity naman yan. But the thing is this, bago mo sabihin ang problema natin ay disinformation, dapat sabihin mo, bakit tayo vulnerable sa disinformation? Bakit ang dami sa atin ay naiwala sa disinformation? Now, obviously, there's the fundamental, there's this whole school of thought about neuroscience literature that says, certain temperaments, personalities are more amenable to conservative ideals. So, for instance, if ikaw ay risk-averse person, ikaw ay change, skeptic person, comfort zone person, siguro conservative ideas or traditionalism could be more appealing to you. If ikaw ay medyo risk-taker person, ikaw or even depending on your socioeconomic circumstances, that could influence also your preferences, right? So there are physiological elements. There are also socioeconomic factors. Generally, the wealthier a person gets, suddenly you don't want to pay as much. You're suddenly concerned about your taxes, so you tend to be more conservative, so on and so forth, right? So there are many explanations for why people become more conservative or liberal, right? Hindi lang ito usapin ng matalino ka or hindi. But I think when it comes to the issue of disinformation, clearly, mas vulnerable yung bansa mo kung walang critical thinking or functional literacy, like we don't have sufficient functional literacy and critical thinking embedded dun sa education system mo. So ngayon, dito ako talaga nakakatakot ito. Kasi kung totoo itong mga numero na ito, na ganun kadami sa ating mga kabataan at kababayan ay nagsasuffer from lack of functional literacy or do not have sufficient functional literacy, magtataka ba tayo na napakalakas yung epekto ng disinformation? Right? Magtataka ba tayo na basically ganito yung ating kalagayan bilang isang bansa or demokrasya? So this is what I'm saying. Kaya nagpo-push back ako dun sa whole, no offense to some of our liberal friends, puro silang disinformation. And I say like, okay, yeah, pero hindi naman yun ang pinakaugat eh. Mas ugat pa ng problema yung ating failed education system. And then of course, the next question is, bakit nag-fail yung education system? Then you go to the next layer, right? Parang parang turtle over turtle over turtle. So you have to dig deeper. You have to think deeper. And then that goes to leadership, right? our DepEd secretaries throughout different administrations. Ano mga reformang ginawa nila? Ano yung mga trainings na ina-avail natin sa ating mga school teachers? Ano yung mga retraining and essentially upward educational training na provide natin? Meron bang lifelong learning? Because especially in the 21st century, guys, it's not about what you know, it's what you can learn, unlearn, and learn or relearn again. Diba? So it's constant innovation, it's constant learning and relearning, right? Even at the highest levels, especially with AI and different kind of technological innovations, not to mention social media and whatnot, right? So, what I'm saying here is, guys, is that itong mga nakakabahala na ng mga numero na yan, they give us some insight, if not a definitive insight, into why our democracy is particularly vulnerable, not only to disinformation per se, but vulnerable to demagogic politics, to performative populism, and to basically pa-cute style of candidates. And when I say pa-cute, I mean, wala naman tayo problema kung mag-pa-cute kay here and there. It's unavoidable, but basically yung vacuous, vacuous, policy, essentially, proof or policy empty campaigning and all of that. So in short, these numbers just tell us gaano kalalim yung problema natin. In fact, more worrying, these numbers are telling us how things could get even worse in the coming elections. Because sa darating na elections, lalaki yung mga numero kung ganyan kalalim yung problema. Kaya best wishes na lang kay Secretary Angara and whoever is now in charge sa DepEd. Kasi kung hindi natin ayusin yan, imagine niyo guys, maging mas malalim pa yung problema nito. Because as years go by, lalong nagiging more sophisticated yung AI, deepfake, disinformation, and then pag hindi natin inayos ito, talagang magkakaroon talaga tayo ng basically hindi lang kumbaga educational system hemorrhage basically ang mangyari for years and decades to come, and that has massive implications para sa ating demokrasya because we know at the end of the day the quality of our democracy depends on the quality of your citizenship, and the quality of your citizenship will determine sino maging mga elected leaders, right? And your elected leaders of course can also appoint people, whether it's their staff or appointed people. So makikita mo may ano yan may vicious cycle or virtuous cycle depending on the quality of leaders we put there. Now, to be honest, democracies all around the world, US pa lang, di ba? Kitang-kita natin saan napupunta. Lahat tayo may problema yan. But I think clearly sa Pilipinas, we're very, very vulnerable. And this is not, kaya I pushed back against the myth of Bobotan and all of that, which I felt was very elitist. And it's not only what I felt. I mean, I said, look at it. Ang laki ng numero ng ating mga ABC ay bumoboto sa mga katulad ni Digong or kung titignan as the share of the population ang pinakamataas na suporta for the Sara Dutertes and Digongs for year after year, we're actually yung mga middle class and upper class natin mga kababayan, di ba? In fact, yung mga katulad ni Lenny, katulad ni Vico, katulad now na tumatakbo ni Kiko, actually a lot of times their strongest base of support are yung mga pinaka-marginalized natin ng mga kababayan, for instance in Class E, right? But having said that, we have this generalized problem na sobrang talagang crisis mode na education system natin, so we're not really preparing our voters to deal with the intensified disinformation crisis that we're facing now. Okay, I won't bedevil. I think I got the point across. Mahirap na magsalita, baka ma-HDI na naman tayo, sasabihin na naman tayo Human Development Index, tapos iti-take out of context naman tao. But you know what, guys? Actually, yung nangyari, that whole brouhaha about the Human Development Index, it just tells you guys, meron tayong isa pang problema. Ang problema natin is dinideny pa yung problema. Right? So, this whole disinformation discourse, I think, is just a shallow analysis problem. But isa pang problema is that when you point out facts and data, like for instance, I mentioned Human Development Index data, next thing you know, pinipersona ng grata ka na ng ibang mga persona, trapos, right? Yung pa nga, ginagaslight pa natin yung mga tao who are raising alarm bells based on actual numbers, right? And then we attack them and say they're this and this and this and that, right? Kaya ako, sumagot din ako, baka kayo ang may prejudice sa ganyan. But in general, yun lang problema natin na politika, or worse, guys, ina-attack pa yung messenger if someone bothers to come out and point out this problem. So if we are not willing to even talk about the problems with our Human Development Index, problem with the education divide, digital divide, lumala obviously yung panahon ng pandemic. If you look at our rankings compared to our peers in the region, lalo tayong lumayo. If you look at, of course, itong mga university rankings, this is relative, right? So pabaksak tayo ng pabaksak over the past 5-6 years. A part of me is not surprised. Maybe may kinalaman talaga yung extended and overextended lockdown sa Pilipinas kumpara sa ibang bansa who returned to normalcy much faster than us, and yung transition back nila into face-to-face schooling was much faster than us. Kaya hindi ako surprised na ang baba ng rankings ng universities natin. Even our top universities are not even among 500 in Asia. I mean, what? This is crazy. I mean, UP used to be top 5 in entire Asia and top 50, 60 in the world. I mean, this is crazy, right? So that brings us to our discussion of the race today. So if you look at the race today, these are the numbers we're seeing when it comes to our Senate, which just tells you gaano kalalim yung problema natin. So, there was a time where, Jovito Salonga was your number one, not once, but 2 or 3 times nag-top si Jovito Salonga sa Senate race. But those days are gone. Those days are really, really gone. And again, there are many explanations. We had our good friend Mr. Nai here, who used to work in the media in the Philippines before moving abroad, who was mentioning essentially yung problema natin sa mainstream media na sensationalist, and then ginawa na lang Taglish, and then tinanggal yung Ingles, blah, blah, blah. Okay, given na yan. But masasabi rin talaga natin is, nakakulang din siguro tayo kasi back in the day, hindi natin na-explain sa ating mga kababayan ano ba talaga siguro ang trabaho ng Senado. Siyempre, on the surface, or at least in terms of CV and all, napaka-impressive ni Jovito Salonga. In terms of actual achievements, napakagaling si Jovito Salonga. But honestly, I think we're in a point in history whereby hindi ako sigurado kung na-appreciate ng mga ibang kababayan natin kung ano ba talaga ang trabaho ng senador. Hindi po trabaho ng senador na maging entertainer, na magbibigay ng jacket or mag-hep-hep huray or basically walang ginagawa, figurine lang, or hindi po trabaho ng isang senador na maging factotum ng isang presidente or vice-presidente or dating presidente, di ba? Ito, tingnan mo yung Senado natin, di ba? Hanggang ngayon, in-interpret pa rin yung ibig sabihin ng forthwith. Pero yung isang senador dyan, ang daming oras. Isang hearing, 2 hearing, 3 hearing, 4 na hearing, concern sa due process. Even though yung pinoprotektahan niya, ay mga amon niya sa politika ngayon, habang inaano niya yung kapatid niya, ay mga tao na walang respeto at all sa due process. But we are where we are, guys. In short, we're paying the price of decades of failure, but especially in the past decade, a complete collapse in our educational standards, if you look at all of these numbers that we're seeing. So kaya ganyan ang mga top numbers natin, right? Halos sigurado na the Tulfos are almost sure. It's just a question of, so if you want to put a percentage on this, so yung first is the Third Eye Analytics says, Bongo's chances is 85%. Erwin Tulfo's chances are 80%. Ben Tulfo's chances of making to Magic 12 is 75%. Tito Soto is 70%. Bato de la Rosa, more than 50% at 65%. So almost sure na Bato will be re-elected, but I'm not sure if he can avoid the, alam niyo na. Ping Lacson, more than 50% chance at 60% as we stand. Pia Cayetano, 55%. Bong Revilla, Mr. Buduts, 50% chance for him to make it to the next. Lito Lapid is still in the mix, 45%, puts him at number 9. Abigail Bina at 40% chance. Bam Aquino ranked between 9 to 13 at 35%. Camille Villar, boses ng mga millennials, right? Ang bagong boses, right? At 30% ranked between 10 to 14. Manny Pacquiao still within the mix at 11 to 15, chance of winning 25%. Kiko Pangilinan 13 to 17, 15%. Benor Abalos 10%, 14 to 18. And then by the way, there's Amy Marcos there, 15 to 19 at chance of winning at around 10%. So I'm just giving you, for instance, mathematically ano yung mga chances na makapasok. So if you look at the people who are above 50% chance to make it, and then titignan mo yung kanilang background, kanilang achievements, kanilang values, kanilang adhikain, kanilang patriotism, ayan, medyo mapapakamot ka talaga ng ulat. Tsaka wait, ano ulit ang trabaho ng senador? Wait, anong maging contribution ng mga taong yan? So this is, for instance, one way of looking at it. There's another survey. This is the survey of the surveys, meaning even ibang survey agencies were tell you behind the scenes na ito yung pinaka nirespeto nila. Again, these are not released in public, some of them. This one, again, Bongo at number 1 to 2, tied with Erwin Tulfo. Bato de la Rosa, this is April 4 to 10, as number 3, tied with Tito Soto. Ben Tulfo, good morning, with Binay. Dito medyo mataas si Binay. Then you have Cayetano, Lapid, Bong Revilla. Dito, si Camille slightly higher at 10 to 13. Basically tied with Lacson and Willie Revilla. And then here, actually, Philip Salvador is even higher than Pacquiao, Bam, Abalos, Pangilinan. And again, was consistent at this between this survey and another survey is Amy Marcos at 17 and 18. Now, kanina lang, as in literally before we started, kaya medyo late din tayo nag-start because, data was coming in because I want to give you as much data as possible. Kanina lang, mini-message lang tayo ng ibang campaign people, etc. So the latest number from this very authoritative survey we got, again, these are internal surveys kasi, so hindi ito for public consumption. Kiko Aimee at around 26% tied. Camille and Philip Salvador are basically tied at 27%. Bam, Manny, and Willie Revillame are tied at 28%. Oh. So again, that tells you grabing dikit ang labanan dun sa last two and all of that. Hi, okay, let's go to the good news. Well, at least the good news is that, listen, some of the surveys we're seeing, in fairness, Bam makes it at least in the top 10 even, not even top number 11 or 12, right? That's quite something. Because let's not forget, this election was the tightest Senate race at basically labanan nito ng mga labanan nito ng alyansa na backed up by the admin machine and basically the whole DDS side. And in terms of resources, all the resources are basically with these two camp. Although, of the two, which camp is slightly even in a better position. Although, sabi ko yung iba dyan na medyo happy time sila, thanks to Formal. Okay, anyway, alam niyo na. Anyway, sabi naman ni Justice Carpio pa, hindi naman so against that backdrop, for Bam to make it as high as top 10%, I think Kiko also earlier was also in that position, although he had a slide. A lot of that was in Visayas region. I don't know, is it because of those food vlogs or something like that? But at least for these progressive candidates, or at least liberal candidates, and neither DDS nor BBM side or Allianza side, to at least be within 10% and, top 10, sorry, of this field of 60 candidates, and not to mention way ahead of Amy Marcos, way ahead of Benhur Abalos, or ahead of Pacquiao, ahead of... by the way, I'm not talking about merit here. I'm talking about political resources, machinery, and momentum here. Unfortunately, this is the situation we're facing right now. Kaya nga, I gave that long opening about our education crisis, diba? Kasi dapat natin maintindihan bakit ang labanan na lang dito for the meritorious candidates is basically for the last two. But interesting, BAM makes it to even as high as top 10 or at least 11 in some of the races. So that's quite something. That's quite impressive. And not to mention, sobrang limited yung resources nila. Right? So limited na resources nila. Now, having said that, as I said, there are a couple of caveats we have here, right? Unang-una, we're yet to see ano yung maging epekto ng endorsement ni Lenny at saka ni Sara. Can Lenny give a few extra points to Pacquiao and Abalos? But interestingly, if she gives extra points to Pacquiao and Abalos, and then you look at some of the surveys, baka this doesn't come at the expense of Camille, it might come at the expense of Kiko or Bam even, right? So that's tricky. Very tricky yan. Very tricky yan. Although in theory, I said, makes sense to support, even though admin, even though hindi progressive, because you want to make sure hindi makapasok yung mga iba na alam mo naman saan sila tumatayo in terms of yung kanilang stance on human rights, EJK, or actually walang stance. Thank you, diba? So you could say, the thinking is worst case scenario, kung hindi makapasok yung mga preferred candidate ko, at least ito yung backup plan natin. But then again, there's also a possibility na yung mga endorse ng bago ay magko-compete doon sa mga in-endorse dati at saka mga main candidates, right? So that's a risk, unfortunately. That's a risk. In addition to the fact that endorsing some of the Alianza candidates in itself, for at least for some supporters of the Pink Movement, raises its own ethical questions, right? Like, ano ulit yung ano ni Pacquiao when he was a senator? Ano ulit yung sinabi niya about the LGBTQ plus community? Ano ulit si ganito, ganyan? Nung nakita niya si Alice ko, blah, 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 right? But as I said, even if we put aside that debate and consideration, even from a tactical point of view, I look at some of numbers, biglang napapakamot ako because wait lang, baka you're helping but you might inadvertently end up helping Pacquiao at the expense of Kiko and Bam, or baka mag-cancel out sila and then makapasok si, I don't know, Camille or whatever, or now Philip Salvador even, right? So, and alam natin where Philip Salvador stands. Well, I don't. Well, clean slate siya, yung background niya, but we know where he stands nevertheless. And then the other factor here is yung machine. Some put it as high as 10%, even more, double digit. I don't know. But 5%, if the machine, what does machine mean? May mga ibang lugar sa ating bansa na basically kung sinabi ni mayor or sinabi ni governor na ganito, ganyan, that could be actually the voter turnout preference, outcome. Rather than what you're seeing in the survey. Kasi tinatanong lang sa survey, sinong gusto mong bobotohin. Pero kung kunyari may mga lugar na kung saan ultimately susunod ng tao doon sa mga local government leaders, right? And that's why it's important na, for instance, Kiko and Bam are picking up huge endorsement. I think in Cavite, we see that in other very vote-rich. So Cavite, Cebu, for instance, these are very, very vote-rich areas of the country. So if you pick up endorsement, then that's important. And then we also know yung tinatawag na, di ba? You have the slates and all of that. Pero may sample ballot ka. Yung mga ibang mga kababayan natin, because nakakailo, ang dami pwedeng botohin, dala-dala nila yung sample ballot nila. Of course, bawal yung sample ballot on the last few days, medyo, but sample ballot is parang basically yung guide mo, if not sabihin natin kodigo mo pag pumunta ka sa so sa sample ballot malalaman din natin sino ba talagang sinusuportahan ng administration. And remember, because 12 yung choices mo and usually people vote 6 to 8, it really matters anong sample ballot dun sa mga iba't ibang riyon ng ating bansa. So that could make another difference. So I won't be surprised there could be a 5% bump for pro admin or Alianza members. But more importantly, we also know that the actual Alianza might be different on come the election day from the professed or formally declared Alianza. For instance, I don't think Camille Villar by any stretch of imagination is anymore considered as an ally of BBM. As you know, there is already it's like alam na natin, Sara now is accusing the government of of politicizing this investigation against this business interest of this and that. Okay, you can connect the dots. I mean, obviously, wala. Totally other side. But to begin with, ba't pa siya nandun sa Alianza? So at least you have 2, if not more, na bakante sa loob ng Alianza. Now, there could be also a consideration that, okay, dun sa 12 Alianza candidates, hindi lang yung dalawa na basically umalis. May isa or dalawa rin na parang basically, I'm not sure, baka hopeless na. So you might actually have room for other candidates na hindi DDS, hindi rin Alianza, pero less DDS kaysa less hindi Alianza. Right? So, then things can get interesting. So, for instance, I was asking, like, in exchange for endorsing, for instance, Pacquiao or Abalos, is there a quid pro quo understanding na proprotektahan yung mga boto or at least lalagay sa sample ballot, sabihin natin sila Kiko or Bam, right? And that could make all the difference come the election day. So, that's another factor you have to keep in mind, diba? The other caveat I want to add also here, guys, is I saw one internal survey. This is based on consumer sentiment. So hindi ito your usual political survey. This is a corporate survey, used by, tycoons and all. Dun sa survey na yan, nakita natin 21% ng ating mga voters, especially yung mga Gen Z voters at mga kabataan natin, actually decide on the day of election itself. And it makes perfect sense because you're looking at not 1, 2, you're looking at 12 different candidates. So I won't be surprised magsa-scramble pa yan in the coming days. So in short, things can still change between now and election day because up to a fifth of your voters are still not final about yung kanilang slate, Senate slate, right? So that's the other thing that you have to keep in mind. But nevertheless, of course, guys, of course, kaya nga bumalik na naman tayo dun sa issue ng education crisis, incompetence. Alam mo, parati sa Pilipinas, tinitingnan natin yung problema ng corrupt yung politiko, ganito yung politiko. Unfortunately, yung recently, yung isa ICC level criminal. But you know, incompetence is also a form of political crime, right? Sabi nga ni Talleyrand, di ba? Yung foreign minister ng France under Napoleon, the former king, etc. was like, it was worse than a crime, it was a mistake, right? Yung expression na yan, which basically means that sometimes incompetence is even worse than actual crime because it creates a lot. And you can clearly see pagdating sa ating education crisis, way beyond the whole Mary Grace Piatos and Miggy Mango and all of that, is also complete incompetence. Like, kasi may corruption din sa ibang bansa eh. May corruption din sa different administration throughout the years. But incompetence itself sometimes does even more damage than just corruption alone. Because, you have massive corruption in Korea when in its high growth years, even more recently, kaya natanggal si Gyonghae. Well, yung latest medyo ibang kaso niyan. But, China, massive corruption scandals and cases, and marami pa dyan tinago pa dahil sa political consideration. So we're seeing just the tip of the iceberg. If you go to, for instance, Malaysia, way more developed than us in terms of per capita, more than twice higher than us. You had the 1MDB scandal. Turkey, I can go on and on. Many countries are more developed than us, and yet they have massive corruption problems, and their level of corruption is not too far away from us. Thailand is another case, for instance, I can think about. So having said all of that, guys, what I'm saying is that we're paying the price of incompetence in as much as corruption and the worst types of people, really the kakistocracy that ended up in charge of our state institutions over at least the past decade, if not more. No, so give an end, guys. But how can we move forward if we don't go to the root cause of the problem? And that's exactly where things are really, 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 really tricky. If your education system is also so tricky. Kaya talagang sympathetic ako sa lahat ng mga ibang candidates dyan na that despite limited resources and reach, they're really doing their best to at least itaas yung antas ng diskusyon, itaas yung antas ng political discourse, policy discourse, and they're really doing their best to break through. Really, that's the term, breakthrough. Kasi minsan ang hirap to break through eh. Like, you're just dealing with so much and you have so limited resources and bandwidth, and like, how are you gonna break through? And even if you have bandwidth, like, paano mo i-package ang isang bagay para maging receptive ang tao or ma-appreciate ang tao, di ba? Because, I mean, so basically, Philip Salvador and Bam and Kiko are more or less within the same range of preferability among our voters in practically all of the surveys I'm looking at right now. A few percentage difference here and there. Remember, there's a margin of error, 2 to 3%. And if you look at it really, parang it's crazy, isn't it? That, like, not basically tied and competing for the last spot or two, a group of candidates who have tremendously divergent levels of competence when it comes to the work at hand, right? Kaya nga sabi ko, kung mag-apply ka nga lang ng entry-level job, ang dami hiningi sa'yo, PNP clearance. Mag-apply ka lang ng visa ng ibang bansa, dami hiningi sa'yo, di ba? And then, tatakbo ng senador and anong hiningi? It's like, ito ang hiningi, di ba? I mean, like, Mr. Epektibo based on what? Epektibo in terms of what? Right? And then, guys, kung titignan nyo yung kila Bam and Kiko, for instance. Just sila Bam and Kiko. And alam natin sila Bam and Kiko, hindi sila yung mga, yung mga, alam mo, daming ibang senador na walang kwenta dyan. Ibang senador na medyo mediocre dyan, let's just put it nicely, na get away by just putting yung mga batas na either parang okay, or yung, wait lang, hindi ka naman, principal author co-author ka, nakikisign-sign ka lang eh. Ibang usapin kung talaga ikaw yung original author, ikaw yung nag-advocate, and the fact that yung batas na yan ay talagang yung batas na yan ay talagang masubstansya talaga, na talaga may malaking positive na epekto sa ating bansa. Like for instance, just to give an example, um, Bam, when he was a senator, he was visionary enough to look at, for instance, looking forward to, at least this is what I see from some of the data here, that, like he saw the value of, creating the market for EV industry, right? And now, for instance, if you buy electric cars, whether it's Tesla, BYD, whatever, they don't have any import tax, or very limited last time I checked, until 2027 yata. And they would say, if you look at the track record of Bam when he was last a senator, he had huge contribution. And look at like, I mean, tingnan niyo gaano kadaming punong-puno yung page. Nakaka-relate naman tayo kasing CV na. But like, look at Bam's page. Like, like, notable authored, co-authored laws. Republic Act number 10931, or the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education, Free Internet Access in Public Space, Microfinance NGO Act, Anti-Age Discrimination Act, Children's Emergency Relief and Protection Act, Custom Modernization and Tariff Act, No Shortchanging Act, Go Negosyo Act, Philippine Lemon Law, Philippine Competition Act, Foreign Ships Colliding Act, Youth Entrepreneurship Act, Sangguniang Kabataan Reform Act, Microfinance NGO Act, Credits Surety Fund Act, Election Service Reform Act, Act authorizing the Punong Barangay to administer the oath of office, Department of Information and Communication Technology Act of 2015, Act expanding the benefits and privileges of persons with disability, Closed Caption Broadcasting Television Program Act, Bangsamoro Organic Law, Filipino Sign Language Act. And then you could look at in terms of his political experience, Deputy Senate Minority Leader, Senator back in the day, Chair of the Senate Education, Chair of the Senate Trade, Chairman of National, and then if you look at yung kanya education background, Harvard Kennedy School, Ateneo, nag-law school pala siya. Nag-law school ba siya? Anyway, sorry, I didn't know that. I thought, anyway, pero alam ko ano siya, management engineering siya in Ateneo, which is a very, very elite, very, very elite and competitive course. And you can look at it in terms of policy focus, eliminating red tape, amend the rice tarification law, increasing the budget of education, reforming the K-12 law, ban on offshore game, etc. And then Kiko also, very impressive. I mean, if you look at Kiko, for instance, also ang dami niya mga contributions. I mean, and of course, Kiko is one of the stalwarts of his party, etc. Makita mo with Kiko also, ang dami niya mga notable, laws, Pinasag, Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund Act, amending the Organic Agriculture Act, increasing the bed capacity of the Bicol Medical Center, Alternative Learning System Act, GMRC, Values Education Act, National Cooperative COVID-19 Vaccination Program Act, Cooperative Development Officer Act, Free Internet Access in Public Places. So, I mean, and of course, you go to the background. Similarly, Kennedy School at Harvard, and then of course UP College of Law, etc. And then senator multiple times, naging councilor, naging Senate judge dun sa impeachment ni Corona, presidential assistant on food security and agricultural modernization. I mean, and then biglang munta sa iba, clean slate, diba? And they're tied, basically heading into the race. So, medyo malalim yung problema natin mga kababayan. But I told you guys, like for instance, I saw numbers of Kiko. Isa mga problema natin, yung mga katulad natin na middle class ay hindi rin nag-rally behind. It's not like, ABC is 90% behind Kiko and then like, hindi eh. Like, they're all in the range of 20s and 30s in terms of percentage points among all socioeconomic classes. So may problema talaga tayo at yung education crisis natin cuts across all socioeconomic classes. Kaya nga, again, the myth of Bobotante and all of that is very elitist and is also very inaccurate. Kasi even yung ABC natin, yes, fine, maliit ang population yan, pero marami resources yan. Like, ganito, we have easily 20 million middle class in the Philippines. If each of them just give a piso, you'll have 20 million peso for your campaign. If each of them give 10 pesos or 100 pesos, then you have actually enough money to run a full campaign. Right? You can even, so if you can get 1,000 pesos from the 20 million, right? Or half of the 20 million, or even 1/4 of the 20 million, you still have a lot of money to run. Like, remember, yung mga katulad ni Obama, katulad ni Bernie Sanders, right? These are people who were able to run very competitive candidates and successful in the case of Obama not once but twice based on crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. Unfortunately, hindi tayo katulad ng mga European countries whereby talagang sisigurado yun ng mga partido na they're gonna bankroll your campaign. Hindi katulad sa atin na kanya-kanyang diskarte basically. No, or dapat galing ka sa admin slate or galing ka sa isang malaki or may patron ka. No. So, what I'm saying here is that hindi rin kulang rin talaga guys. Kulang yung political mobilization ng ating middle class, and then meron tayong learning poverty and lack of critical thinking that cuts across. Hindi ito in a specific socioeconomic class. Talaga may problema tayong malalim guys. Kaya first of all, we have to understand bakit tayo nandito so that we understand how we can move to the next step, which is how, well, solving is really ambitious word at this point in time. It's more like dealing with this crisis steadily and effectively over years to come. And obviously, there's no way we can deal with this crisis, whether it's the education crisis and the broader democratic crisis, kung hindi tayo makatulong na makapasok kahit isa or dalawa na matinong mga kandidato or dating senador sa ating susunod na Senado. Because our current Senate is already like fill in the blanks, right? And if some of these surveys are correct, my goodness, the next Senate could be even way more interesting. And it's important that some of these good guys get in, because if some of these good guys get in, guys, they will be the pivot or springboard for a more responsible and self-respecting Senate, to be honest. Like, tignan nyo, ano yung Chinelas Act? Okay. Ganito guys, there's no shortcut solution here. Naniniwala ako sa himala, pero when it comes to our politics here, hindi ako naniniwala na magkaroon ng himala in these elections, and that tomorrow if we get, but guys, we desperately need to get, yes, correct, a few at least quality candidates, real good candidates in, para together with Risa Ontiveros and sino pa bang matino dyan sa Senado, they pressure and shame the rest of Senate. Obviously, hindi yung mga Robin Hood Padilla, pero at least yung mga the rest of the Senate na medyo nasa gitna o nagtatrapo-trapuan to get their act together. Because now it's basically just Risa. Honestly, it's just basically Risa. And gets ko saan galing si Lenny, but I think if Pacquiao and Abalos get in but not Bam or Kiko, and it's still again just Risa, you need to get the quality candidates in so that they help Riza quality kind of incumbents to get this thing together. For them to be the locomotive, the springboard, the mitochondria for some sort of reform and moving in the right direction sa ating Senado para come 2028 at least may pag-asa ng mga tao sa ating sistema. Because if this becomes more circus-like after these elections, sa totoo lang, yeah, tama. In fairness, Sherwin, JV Ejercito, like, I may not agree with them on some issues and sometimes publicly, but nakikita na, in fairness, by the way, both JV and Sherwin have endorsed BAM, just to be clear about it. And Sherwin also helped Riza a lot dun sa Alice Co issue. Kay Ejercito naman, kay JV, the good one naman, yun sa universal healthcare, among others, right? So, again, yeah, right. You know what I'm saying? Like, you want Riza and some of these other good candidates or some of these other senators na, alam mo naman, may utak, nag-iisip, medyo may prinsipyo, at least, and then you want to get some other quality. Otherwise, guys, ang hirap. Because you're talking about 24 senators there, each of them with their own ego and fiefdoms there. So you really need to get as many quality candidates as possible para lang medyo magkaroon ng locomotive for reform para come 2028, because I have no illusions that we're going to see transformative change in the next 2 or 3 years, but at least you want to see people having enough faith in our democracy so that come 2028, sana naman medyo ma-reverse natin itong the Duterte decade damages to our democracy. Which, by the way, ito pang masaklap, it's not like Duterte came in and ruined a paradise. No, we were already a mess even before Duterte came in. In fact, my whole argument, my whole book on Duterte and my writing was about why Duterte won, because marami tayong problema. Maraming kapalpakan sa mga problema sa sistema natin to begin with. Kaya nga nanalo si Digong. Kaya nga desperado yung mga tao for change. Kaya nagkaroon tayo ng protest vote. And then things got even crazier yung 2022 with the unity. But, having said that, guys, you need some victories, some good news, some para lang kapit lang, 'di ba? Para may pag-asa ka pa. Para by 2028, when I feel the field is gonna be very open, if Sara gets impeached, oh my goodness, the field is completely open. Who knows? Maybe Lenny can come back and win this again. I mean, who knows? There could be another Lenny figure or Risa, or who knows, right? Even maybe Trillanes will suddenly be in the mix. I don't know. But my point is, the possibilities are immense and the possibilities are really positive. But for us to even believe in those possibilities, guys, we need to make some gains now. Kaya ang pinaka-frustration ko ngayon is bago tayo yung ibang kasama natin sobrang excited mag-blame ng ibang mga kababayan natin from marginalized communities when in fact, yung middle class mismo natin na hindi nagmo-mobilize behind the quality candidates. I see whining, I see daming dakdak, daming sinisisem. Tumulong kayo. Hindi libre. Ay, sorry, hindi libre. I mean, hindi naman libre lang tumulong. I mean, tumulong kayo. Ask 10 other friends to vote for the quality candidates or volunteer in the campaign or get the message out. If you have tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, use it. Yung mga ibang influencer natin dyan na kaibigan, mga vloggers na yayamanin, di ba? O gamitin yung nyo, push for quality candidates kasi ma-endorse kayo ng mga kung sino-sino para lang kumita. Eh, buti nga yung mga matitinong mga mga ibang celebrities natin, si Ann Curtis, mga they're endorsing the good candidates. I think si Gutierrez, she also endorsed so yung mga kaibigan natin who have the resources, who have the voice, who have the platform, please use it to get at least a few decent folks in so that meron tayong pag-asa moving forward so that by 2028 at least, right, may launching pad na tayo. Yun lang. On that note, no, Vico will not be eligible to run for VP or president. And please lang, I hope we get over this messianic complex or something. Vico alone cannot save our country, okay? No one alone. Lenny cannot alone save our country. They'll have to be supported by other people. And there'll have to be 10 other Vicos and 10 other Lennys for this to work. Because guess what? You are up against... How many of them are there, out there? Diba? Yun ang point ko eh. No guys, let's not fall for that the same messianic complex na, if we just get Vico or Lenny and everything. No, you need to support them. There has to be grassroots. Kailangan ng kilusan, kailangan ng totoong partido, kailangan ng mga 10 pang ibang Vico all around the country. You have to mobilize them. You have to put them together. That's political maturity, guys. That's political maturity. That's forward looking thinking, guys. Anyway, sobrang haba yung discussion natin. Lampas na tayo sa 1 oras. But I really felt we needed to flesh this out, guys. Na gaano kalalim yung problema natin. Because otherwise, we won't feel the sense of urgency. But as I said, kapit lang because if we can get a few good things now, we'll be in a position to do big good things in a few years from now. Right? So kaya kailangan na hindi tayo, wag kayong bibitaw, di ba? Don't give up. Because there's hope. But that hope will not just happen on its own. Yung hope has to be actualized. And actualizing that hope means at least get some of the few guys too. Alright? On that note, thank you very much. Maraming salamat. I hope you check out yung mga latest episode na upload natin on our YouTube channel and some of them also here on Facebook and on other platforms when we're gonna ito yung mga episode natin, mga penultimate episodes natin, medyo production level, hindi naman medyo in-effort naman, medyo quality discussions with really some of the leading patriotic minds in the country, if I can put it that way. Alright, guys, kailangan natin gawin yan. 3-4 years ago, if someone told you, Richard, ikaw, Christian, whatever, na, you can become some sort of a political voice on social media or at least on YouTube, and not only in mainstream media, at least in my case and, Christian's case, you would say like, hindi, grabe, wala na take over ng mga trolls eh. But hindi kami nag-give up eh. Actually, I took it as a challenge. Sabi ko, no, I can beat them in their own game. Anong tingin ng mga influencers na nakala nila sila lang kaya No, I can beat them in their own game. Kaya na-challenge tayo, kaya pumatal tayo. Okay, kala nyo kailang magaling sa social media, let's go, alright? At I was never complacent, just because I had huge following on Twitter or Facebook. I said, no, I have to get involved. Let's do TikTok. Although yung TikTok natin, unfortunately, because of the China, basically sinesensor tayo and binaban tayo minsan. But on YouTube, I'm trying my best here, guys. Para we can go, talagang tatapatan natin yung mga walang hiyang mga purveyors of fake news at saka mga children of vipers, to be biblical about it, right? Kailangan natin tapatan mga yan, and kailangan natin lampasan mga yan para talagang may pag-asa yung ating bayan, di ba? It will take years for us to fix our education system and a curriculum and all, if ever. But in the meantime, at least kami dito sa mga maliliit naman platforms na fortunately hindi na ganun kaliit, we're trying to get the message out. And at the end of the day, I on my own, Christian on his own, Christian is like, there's so much we can do on our own. But with your support, if you spread the message, spread the love, spread the hindi naman toxic positivity, but this kind of cautious optimism and I would say realist idealism, then or pragmatic idealism, then talaga may pag-asang bansa natin. Maybe you'll not see the result tomorrow or 2 weeks from now, but you'll see maybe the results as early as 2028. Right? So, yun po ang kailangan natin dito. Kaya lahat tayo guys, nagtatrabaho tayo from different angles, from different dimensions, para eventually magka-converge ito so that may pag-asa talaga yung bayan at demokrasya natin. Not in the super long term, but actually in the medium term. In the medium term. Kayang-kaya yan guys. But we just have to get our act together. Alright? Salamat. God bless. And talk to you soon.